Oh, hello, YouTube. Today in the Naughty Librarian, we are doing horror. I know I don't talk about horror books like a ton on this channel. I mean, I'm the Naughty Librarian. It doesn't really fit the aesthetic, but I love horror stuff. Like, I'm wearing my Halloween tank top. Like, I'm having a good time. I love a spooky book, a spooky movie, love all that. And so I decided, you know what? It's October. Spooky season has begun. Why don't we dive in? Let's do some deep dives into horror books because I have a lot of recommendations and I've kind of broken them up into different categories. So today, why don't we start with the OGs? We're going to do classic horror and iconic horror. And before we dive in, I just want to put my disclaimer here that this is my personal list. It's not the be all end all. There are more books out there. These are just the ones I personally have read and want to recommend. So if I missed your favorite, drop it in the comments, but maybe I haven't read it yet. So no offense to anybody. Anyway, on that note, let's jump in. Let's go ahead and start off with classics, and I have 5 of them. Let's go to the OGest of OGs with Beowulf. And doesn't necessarily have an author. Usually the author is listed as a translator because it was just like an epic poem back in the day. But I'm sure everybody has had to read this in the American high school system. And it's basically, there's a guy and he's got to fight a monster that keeps killing people. And sometimes you feel a little bad for the creature because he only has his like evil mom to hang out with all the time. And then sometimes you're just like, man, you don't have to eat people to take out your anger. But yes, Beowulf, classic of creature features, but definitely a good read. Depends on your translator because not everybody translates it with a sense of whimsy or fun or horror. They all have their own flair for it. So try a few out, but this is the one I got. I'll be honest, I got in particular because the cover was pretty, and then I ended up really liking this translator as well. So this worked out for me. This is by John Earl. Next up, of course, you gotta put Dracula by Bram Stoker in this list. It's Dracula. Like, hello, have you heard about Dracula? Are you part of Planet Earth? So it's pretty iconic and it's classic. I want to recommend it surely for that point. However, just be aware, it's kind of annoying to read. And I think a big part of it is also because it's not a traditional narrative. It's all written in like journal entries and letters and things like that. Like that's how the book is told. And I think if you're not expecting that, it's a little like, it'll throw you back for like a minute. And also it was written by Bram Stoker. And frankly, his misogyny is oozing off the page. So there are some problems here, but it's freaking Dracula. You have to read it at least once. What kind of list would this be if I didn't put Frankenstein by Mary Shelley on it? Obviously, it's freaking Frankenstein. Hello, are you a member of Planet Earth? Like everyone's heard of Frankenstein. And the original text is really good. Mary Shelley, she is our OG goth queen. Love her. And there's some really, really poignant, great writing in this. I think she was like 19. She was a moody, emo teenager when she wrote this, but hot damn, she wrote some good teenage poetry. Also, go with me on this. This is my own personal opinion. I think Victor Frankenstein, the character, is a direct influence on the character of Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. They're both whiny little bitches and like they're the hero of the story, but like they're written in such a way that they're pathetic assholes and no one likes them. I feel like if you resonate with Victor and you think he's the victim in this, you need to reevaluate life decisions because Victor's the fucking worst. But like, it's Frankenstein, you know? The writing is very, very good. I don't think you're supposed to like Victor, and that's the whole point of the book. But yes, I think if Victor Frankenstein didn't exist, Patrick Bateman would not exist. I said what I said. You know what? I'm putting the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde in a horror recommendation video. A lot of people don't necessarily put it into horror, but it is horrific, okay? It's a guy whose portrait takes on all of his inner evil and becomes decrepit and gross. So he, on the outside, looks like, hey, I'm a hot dude around town. Like, that is like the epitome of like some horrific things. It gets even darker and more down the rabbit hole of depravity throughout the book, especially Dorian Gray. I mean, eventually he just starts killing people. And like, he has to call his ex-boyfriend to come over. He's like, hey, I know we broke up and you hate me, but I need you to science away a body, please. So it kind of gets slashery at moments, and it's definitely very demented. So I'm putting this as horror. I think it counts. What about Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux? This one, I mean, it's not necessarily a phantom, okay? It's not a ghost story. It's just like a guy who has severe mental trauma and also antisocial personality disorder, who lives underneath a theater and kidnaps a girl. And also he likes to strangle people. Sorry, spoilers, I guess. It's been out for a minute. I think the musical probably romanticizes this quite a bit in like, oh no, the Phantom's misunderstood. I'm like, no, he's Captain Stranglepants in the book. He strangles people like a lot. So definitely I would say this is like serial killer, slasher kind of a thing. And also he kidnaps women who, like, frankly are too naive to live. But yes, definitely horror, even though there's not an actual phantom in it. Last up for classics, I have Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. And I just read this one recently, and it's a really short read. So if you were like, oh, I don't have time to like devote to a really long classic, this one you could read in a few hours. And it's kind of like the precursor to Dracula, and instead of overt misogyny on the page, this one is definitely very heavily queer-coded lesbian romance that's toxic AF. Honestly, this is a short story. I would say it's a novella, but I wish it was a full-length novel because I feel like you could have delved further into a lot of things in this book and it would have been very rich and interesting. But as is, it's pretty short, but you know, you have Carmilla. She's a vampire, she's toxic, and she likes the ladies. I liked it a lot. I have a whole like drunk classics on it already if you just really want to skip it and just have someone tell you what happens in it. But that exists. But Carmilla, I mean, it's also a classic and is pretty short. You know, high reward, low commitment. Okay, so next category is iconic horror, and I have a whole bunch. I briefly mentioned American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis earlier, and it's definitely an iconic horror book. Like I was saying earlier, Patrick Bateman is our sociopathic, psychopathic killer in a wonderful three-piece Jean Paul Gaultier suit. And his narcissism in the book is just so wild, and I feel like people who read the book and think Patrick Bateman is cool have thoroughly misunderstood the book, because Patrick Bateman is a fucking loser in the whole book. However, I feel like it's a good classic slasher book. So if you're looking for like just psycho killer extravaganza, American Psycho will do it for you. However, just to stress the point one more time, the book is satire. However, covered in blood. Obviously, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty has to be on this list. It's the friggin' Exorcist, okay? Like, this is part of the cultural zeitgeist. Everyone knows, like, something from the movie The Exorcist, which frankly is like a pretty spot-on adaptation of the book. There's slight differences overall, but I mean, it is disturbing. It is like, it was scary to read. There are some sections in here that I do feel are unnecessary. So I don't know. I mean, check trigger warnings, I guess. I mean, it's The Exorcist. You kind of know what you're getting into, but there is some subject matter in here that is a bit extreme. So I've already read this. I have a whole video recapping it already, but yeah, The Exorcist. I was happy that I finally read like the source material. And if you want to skip it, frankly, the movie is pretty close. It's a scary book, and that's always a fun thing to read. Why don't we go ahead and do a little deep dive into Stephen King, the king of horror here. Everyone knows Stephen King. So many of his books are movies. However, I haven't read the most Stephen King. I'm gonna be honest with everybody, but I have read his most iconic works, I would say. So let's start off with Carrie. Carrie's not necessarily his best work, but it is his debut. And you're like, wow, what a weird book to make your debut. Because Stephen King is a grown man and the main protagonist is a teenage girl who just got her first period. So I don't know if he's necessarily the right author to be telling that story, but here we are. And the movie is a good adaptation. I think the book takes it a lot further at times. It gets darker at times, and it's much more existential, I would say, than the movie is, because, you know, the movie's got to keep it moving. This one can be moody and like brood and like think about cruelty in a way that the movie doesn't really do. But overall, I'm not going to say Carrie is Stephen King's best work, but it was his first work, so I think it is worth reading. Also, it's fairly short. It's not a very long book. This is like about 300 pages. It's very short. Worth the read. I also enjoyed Pet Sematary, but maybe not for the reason you think, because Pet Sematary, you know, there's a pet cemetery, which is a Native American burial ground. They're using that trope, which is problematic, but it's an old trope in horror, so we're just gonna go with it here. And when you bury things there, they come back to life, but they don't come back right. And yeah, so it's kind of zombie-esque, I guess, just like evil demonry type of thing. But while the book is about evil zombies, it's actually more so a treatise on grief. I think this book is actually talking about the grief of losing a child, but through the lens of zombies. So it's actually doing two things. I think that's a lot of Stephen King's work, honestly. He's like exploring a central concept through a horror narrative. This one, it is grief and being able to move on from grief. It is very sad, I would say. The movie is less sad than the book. The book is like really broody moody. We're gonna get into some existential crisis time here. And because they can't deal with their grief and they can't move on with it, you get fucking zombies. So I think the metaphor here is quite clear. You know what? The Shining by Stephen King is one of my all-time favorite books. It is so good. Look at this. I tabbed the ever-living hell out of this book. I only tab things when there's a part or a line or something that I think is particularly good. Look at this shit. Like, this is wild. This one in particular is similar to Pet Sematary, where I feel like it's exploring the central concept of like generational abuse and the cycle of it and how to break it. Also told through, you know, horrific ghosts. So basic plot: family, mom, dad, kid, go to a remote mountain hotel to be its caretakers for the winter for like 3-4 months. Nothing comes in or out. You're stuck there by yourself. So already you have the isolation going. Also, problem is, hotel infested with ghosts. Just so many ghosts, and they're not nice ones. You don't got Casper up in here. You got like evil ghosts doing evil things. And then we're gonna triple down, and their kid Danny, he's got the Shining. He has mental abilities. He can see the ghosts. He is tormented. On base level, you're like, ooh, this is a really scary ghost story. And it is. You have to deal with ghosts. You have to deal with the like environment. They're up in the high mountain in blizzards, you know, you can't escape. Isolated. It's got all of the good, like, creepy horror things. However, it's also about trying to break the pattern of abuse, because both the parents in this book came from abusive backgrounds where their parents abused them, and now that they're adults, they kind of are trying their best not to continue that. I would say the mother is doing better than the father is. I like cried. I'm gonna be honest. I cried during parts of this book because it was so meaningful. Not because it was scary. It was just like, wow, this like hit a nerve deep down. So yes, if any of the books you read in this video, please be The Shining. It is remarkably good. You know what? I'm just gonna say it. It's better than the movie. The movie is the basic gist of the book, but the book dives into stuff and it really has some deep meaning. The characters are very different. So personally, I prefer the book. I said what I said. I think it's really good. All right, the time has come. Let's do some Anne Rice. I think Anne Rice is the author I have read the sheer most amount of books from, because I've read almost all of them at this point. So let's just do like the first book of the series in general. So Interview with the Vampire. And this one is hard because I wouldn't necessarily say it's like strictly horror. It's kind of more paranormal with horror elements, but we're gonna put it into horror because I feel like the main point is like showing how being a vampire, being immortal, all of those things is horrific. So we're gonna go with it as being horror. And I mean, it's Interview with the Vampire. If you haven't read it yet and you're on this channel, I feel like it'd be weird. At its core, it's kind of about two queer vampires as a couple, and they have a toxic relationship, and then they adopt a daughter. Like, if you really want to know what the book's about, that's kind of what it's about. Interview the Vampire. Classic, iconic horror. In fact, I think it's very nearly 50 years old at this point. Maybe it counts as a classic. You know, like, okay. I'm just gonna put The Witching Hour on here. This is the Mayfair Witches trilogy. Did I like this book? Arguably no. However, it is definitely a horror book and it's iconic, so I put it on the list. Because I think this is a different genre of horror. I call it sexual terror. This family, the Mayfairs, they don't got enough branches on their family tree. Frankly, it's just a broom handle at this point. Like, there's just not enough branches here, and it's gross. And yeah, so sexual terror. It gets worse, I'll say, in book 2. So, I mean, if you're not sensitive to that, then, like, go for it. But also, like, this book is heavy, honestly. I think this book is, like, 4 pounds. It is intense how heavy it is, and it is chonky. This is very nearly 1,000 pages long. So, I mean, if you're up for a big, heavy book with lots of lore and history in it, this might be for you. I do a video on it though. It is rough to get through at points, but it's iconic. It's in Rice. I put it in here. Why not? Let's get some spooky witches. And since we've been talking about very scary books this whole time, I wanted to throw in one that's like less scary and more just kind of creepy. So I'm gonna say Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This little girl, and she goes into like this other dimension. And there's other mommy there, and she wants to keep her forever in the other dimension. And it's like heavy stuff for a children's book. But it's also kind of about childhood depression and also about finding your place in the world. So it has other things going on for it as well. But it's also just really fun. And it's less like scary than the other books. So if you just want like a light scare, then maybe Coraline by Neil Gaiman is for you. Whew. All right, so that does it for my classics and iconic horror list. Again, I may have missed one of your favorite books on here, but it's not personal. I might not have read it yet. So if you have anything else to add to this list, please put them in the comments. I would love recommendations for more books. And this series is going to keep going with next week's video will be a different genre of horror, and we'll get into more books in that. But this is going to be so much fun because I like scary books and I never talk about them. If you like this video, make sure you give it a like. If you want to see more videos, make sure you subscribe. And if you want cool exclusive content, including early access to videos or a book club, you can consider becoming a channel member or a patron. Links for that are in the description down below. And on that note, I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye.